The sky over my little patch of Wyoming had turned that sickly shade of green people around here know too well, the kind that means the night is about to go bad. At 62, I had seen more storms than birthdays I cared to remember, but this one felt different from the moment the radio cut in with the emergency alert telling residents to seek shelter immediately. By the time the power flickered twice and died completely, the wind was already howling around the house like a train scraping across metal. I stood in the kitchen holding the flashlight with my old fingers tied around the handle, listening to the windows rattle in their frames and telling myself this was just another storm, nothing I hadn't survived before. But that was before the ground started to tremble under my boots. At first, I thought it was thunder rolling far off across the plains, but the vibration grew steadily rising with a deep mechanical growl that wasn't coming from the sky. My dog used to bark at noises like that, but he'd been gone for years. Now it was just me standing in a house that suddenly felt too small and too quiet as the sound swelled into something massive. I stepped to the front door, cracked it open, and the wind nearly ripped it out of my hand. Rain slapped my face cold as ice. I squinted into the dark and my breath caught hard in my throat. A river of headlights snaked up my long dirt driveway, moving slow but heavy engines churning like a thunderstorm made of steel. Then the shapes came into focus. Motorcycles, dozens of them, maybe 50. Riders in black leather hoods pulled tight patches flashing red and white under the lightning. Behind them, 3 large trucks shook on their axles as the storm hit them sideways. I froze, gripping the doorframe. Bikers like that rarely wandered this far off the highway, especially not during a tornado warning. The lead rider braked hard in front of my porch water streaming from his jacket. He climbed off his bike and walked toward me with both hands visible. His voice, somehow steady over the storm, carried clean. "Sir, may we take shelter in your barn? We've got sensitive cargo that can't get wet." His tone was polite, respectful even, but everything about the moment felt wrong. 50 bikers asking to store something in my barn on a night when the sky looked ready to split open. My heart hammered so loud I could barely hear my own voice. "I'm sorry I can't help you." I slammed the door so fast the walls shook. My fingers trembled as I grabbed the phone off the counter, dialing 911 and one with the urgency of a man who'd already lived through the consequences of trusting the wrong people. The dispatcher answered, and I said the words before I could question myself. "There's a biker convoy outside my house. Something's not right. Send someone." The sheriff's SUVs arrived faster than I expected, blue lights slicing through the sheets of rain. I opened the door again just a crack this time and watched from behind it as deputies stepped out shouting commands. One biker was pulling at the barn doors trying to keep the wind from ripping them off their hinges. But from where the deputies approached, flashlights bouncing wildly in the downpour, it must have looked like he was forcing his way inside. "Hands where I can see them. Now." The biker turned confused, trying to yell something over the storm, and within seconds, 2 deputies had him face down in the mud knee, pressed into his back while he gasped for breath. The others raised their hands slowly, rain pouring off their arms as they stood still. I could feel something twist inside my chest as the man on the ground coughed hard, mud splattering up his cheek. For a split second, guilt cut through my fear, but I swallowed it down. I told myself I had done the reasonable thing, the safe thing. Better safe than sorry. Better wrong than dead. The sheriff, a man I'd known since he was young, made his way toward my porch. He asked if they'd threatened me. I shook my head. Not exactly, but the look he gave the bikers said he didn't need more than what he'd already seen to keep them contained. The storm intensified thunder, cracking so close it rattled my teeth. The sheriff ordered the bikers into my barn anyway because the winds were clocking high enough to flip bikes like toys. He stationed deputies at the doors to watch them through the night. I stood there watching the bikers shuffle inside, dripping wet, some limping from the takedown, others carrying tarps to cover whatever was in their trucks. One of them glanced back at me before stepping into the dark of the barn, not angry, not threatening, just tired. That look stuck with me longer than it should have. The storm shrieked around us, shaking the gutters loose and slamming branches into the walls of my house. I closed the door, slowly leaning my forehead against the wood as the lights from the police cruisers flashed across my living room. I told myself again that I had done what anyone would do. But deep down, under the noise of the storm, something quieter whispered that I had made a mistake I didn't yet understand. A mistake I would soon regret for the rest of my life. When the storm finally swallowed the last bit of blue sky, turning everything outside into a wall of shifting darkness, I stepped back from the door and stood in the half-lit living room, listening to the sheriff's cruisers idle outside like uneasy sentries. The house felt smaller than usual, as if the walls had moved in an inch at a time over the last 4 years. That was how long it had been since Mary passed, though some days it felt like 4 months and others like 40 years. Grief doesn't keep a proper calendar. It stretches and thins and comes back thick when you least expect it. I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders and sank into the old recliner that still carried her faint scent of lavender, a scent that always made me stop in doorways for half a second, as if she might be sitting there humming along to the radio. But the chair was always empty and the radio mostly silent now. Losing her had carved something out of me I didn't know how to refill. We were supposed to retire together, travel in that old RV, visit our daughter in Oregon, maybe sell the farm if the winters got too rough. Instead, I was left with a house that collected dust in the corners she used to clean, with soft muttering, a barn that echoed too loudly, and fields that looked bigger every season because I wasn't the same size anymore. Some men get mean when life goes wrong. Some get careless. I just got cautious. I started locking the doors earlier every night. I stopped answering knocks from strangers. I kept the porch light off to save a few dollars on the electric bill. Survival turned into a routine so tight it barely left room to breathe. Folks in town said I'd changed since Mary's death. Said I talked less, looked over my shoulder more. Maybe they were right. The world felt different now, louder, quicker, sharper at the edges. People weren't as neighborly as they used to be. Or maybe I wasn't. Doesn't matter much which came first. What I know is this. I became the kind of man who assumed the worst because assuming the best had broken my heart once, and I didn't intend to let it happen again. The farm itself was a tired thing too. I'd been trying to keep it afloat alone, but the roof over the grain shed sagged from last winter's snow, and the south fence leaned as if it had given up holding anything in or out. The barn could use a fresh coat of paint, the tractor coughed like an asthmatic mule, and my hands weren't steady enough for half the repairs I tried to make. The bills stacked up on the counter, forming their own kind of architecture. Red letters, late notices, polite but firm reminders. I always opened them even when I didn't want to. Mary would have said ignoring trouble never made it smaller, but every time I slid an envelope open, the air in the room thinned a little more. I told myself it was fine that I'd make it through somehow, even though the math didn't agree. The quiet got to me sometimes. Nights came early in Wyoming winters, and the sound of the wind sweeping across empty fields could feel like a reminder of everything that used to fill my life and no longer did. I ate standing up more than I should have stared at the same wall too long, slept in the living room just because the bedroom felt too big for one person. But the worst part wasn't the loneliness. It was the regret. Not the big dramatic kind you see in movies, but the small splinter-like memories you think about when the house is dark and your hands are tired. The one that stuck with me most was the night years back when a young woman's car broke down near my property. She had a toddler with her crying in the back seat. She asked to use the phone, but something about the situation made me weary, and I told her the nearest gas station was only a mile down the road. I watched through the curtain as she strapped the kid back into the cold car, saw the headlights flicker through the snow, and only later realized she must have pushed that car herself. By morning she was gone, but the guilt stayed. I still wondered sometimes how long she walked before someone kinder than me stopped. That memory had taught me that regret doesn't explode. It seeps. I told myself I wouldn't let something like that happen again, but fear has a way of rewriting promises. After Mary died, trust rusted inside me, and everything felt like a potential threat. So when the convoy of motorcycles rolled toward my farm an hour ago, when 50 leather-clad strangers stood on my porch asking for shelter, I didn't see men caught in a storm. I saw danger, trouble, headlines waiting to happen. and I acted accordingly. The sheriff outside probably thought I'd done the right thing. Maybe some part of me still thought that. But sitting alone in that dim room, the walls shaking with the storm, that biker's tired look replaying in my mind, something inside me shifted in a way I couldn't ignore. For the first time in years, I wondered if I'd repeated the same mistake I had sworn never to make again. If fear had once again taken the driver's seat. I wanted to believe I was still the man my wife had married, the man she believed I could be, even when I didn't. But belief is a fragile thing, and loneliness can crack it clean through. The storm outside raged, and the one inside me did too quieter, but just as real. I leaned back in the chair, listening to the barn creak under the wind, thinking about the bikers forced inside under police watch because of a phone call I made too quickly. I didn't know what they carried in those trucks, and I told myself it wasn't my problem. But the truth was starting to tap at the edges of my conscience, soft but insistent. For the first time that night, doubt felt louder than the storm. The storm hit harder than any forecast had warned, slamming into the farm like a freight train without brakes, rattling every loose board and shaking the windows so violently I thought the glass would give. Lightning split the sky again and again, each flash bleaching the world white before drowning it in darkness all over. I stood at the kitchen window, gripping the counter, staring through the sheets of rain toward the barn where those 50 bikers had been forced to take shelter. Their motorcycles looked like hunched animals trying to survive the cold, and the sheriff's cruiser lights flickered red and blue against the metal siding, painting the storm in colors that didn't belong to nature. It was nearly impossible to see anything, but every few seconds I caught glimpses of movement. Shadows shifting, figures bracing themselves against the wind. One of the bikers stood near the double doors of the barn, fighting to hold them shut as gust after gust tried to rip them open. He wasn't resisting law enforcement like I'd thought earlier. He was trying to keep the roof from tearing off. His boots slid on the muddy ground as he leaned his whole weight into the doors, rainwater streaming off his jacket. Another man rushed to help him, their silhouettes merging into a single dark shape against the lightning. I told myself not to care, not to interpret their actions as anything other than being desperate to protect whatever cargo they had in there. But something about the discipline in the way they moved gnawed at me. Criminals don't usually fix your property in the middle of a life-threatening storm. Still, fear is stubborn. It clings to the mind like burrs on denim, and I had spent years letting that fear grow roots. Another flash of lightning lit up the barn, and I saw them more clearly. They weren't scrambling or panicking. They worked as a unit. One man shouted instructions, the others reacted instantly, grabbing ropes, tightening tarps, securing loose boards. I watched as a younger biker sprinted across the yard toward my porch, a bundle in his arms. He climbed the steps quickly, boots leaving muddy prints, and set something by the door. Then he knocked twice loud enough to be heard over the storm. I froze. My pulse thudded hard in my neck. Everything inside me tensed, old survival instincts tightening like a fist. I inched toward the door but didn't open it. Through the peephole, I saw his face wet from the rain, breathing hard. His eyes weren't threatening. They looked exhausted, concerned even. He raised the bundle into view work gloves, thick leather ones nicer than anything I owned. He leaned close to the door. "Sir, the storm's tearing up your roof trim. You should stay warm and don't come outside. You'll catch something bad in this weather." His voice carried that kind of sincerity you don't expect from a stranger, especially one dressed head to toe in black leather. Before I could respond, he set the gloves on the chair and ran back into the storm to help the others. I stood paralyzed, one hand on the doorknob, wrestling with my thoughts in a way I hadn't felt in years. Fear tugged me back into the house, whispering that kindness from strangers was just bait, a trick to lower my guard. But another part of me, the part Mary used to nurture, wondered what kind of outlaw goes out of his way to deliver gloves to an old man who had done nothing but slam a door in his face. I went back to the kitchen window, and the storm answered before I could. A sheet of metal on the barn roof tore loose, whipping into the air. 3 bikers immediately rushed underneath, climbing up the side ladder and bracing it down with their bodies while another hammered it back into place. Their silhouettes moved like men who had done this before, not harming, not hiding, but helping. And there I was inside my warm house dry safe, watching them risk their lives in a storm I had sent them into with a phone call made too quickly. I tried to swallow the knot forming in my throat, but it stuck there thick and stubborn. I told myself they might still be dangerous, that helping with a roof doesn't mean they're saints. But the truth was, I didn't see criminals out there. I saw soaked, tired, freezing men doing everything they could to protect both their cargo and my barn. That realization scraped against something raw inside me. The storm worsened. Trees bent sideways, branches snapping like bones. Thunder boomed so loud it felt like the earth was being torn in two. The sheriff's deputies eventually retreated to their trucks, deciding it was safer to lock themselves inside than stand watch in the open. Their headlights glowed faintly through the torrent, but the bikers kept working, the rain hammering them relentlessly. At one point, the leader, Roy, stepped back from the barn, wiping water from his face. He lifted his eyes toward my house, and even through the sheets of rain, I felt like he was looking right at me. But it wasn't anger or blame in his expression. It was resignation. The kind a man carries when he's used to being misunderstood. That look hit me harder than the thunder. For a moment, I wanted to run outside and tell him I was sorry that I didn't know who they were, that the storm and my fear got the better of me. But I didn't move. I just stood at the window like a coward in a warm house watching men half my age fight a losing battle against wind and rain to protect a barn they didn't owe me anything for. Then, something else caught my attention. One of the bikers peeled back a tarp just slightly to check inside the cargo. The wind lifted the edge for a brief second, and I saw a glimpse of bright colors, maybe packaging shapes I couldn't identify, but definitely not drugs or weapons. Plastic boxes. Something was off. Something that didn't fit any of my assumptions. The tarp slapped back down before I could make sense of it. But doubt was now fully awake inside me, creeping through the cracks, persistent and sharp. My fear started to feel less like protection and more like ignorance wrapped in certainty. And then, the scariest thought of all hit me like a cold wave. What if I was wrong about them? What if calling the sheriff wasn't caution but harm? The storm howled on, but the louder noise came from my own conscience, starting to wake up from years of sleep. I didn't know it yet, but that sleepless night would be the beginning of everything that came next, in the moment I first understood that fear can make a man dangerous in all the wrong ways. By the time the storm eased enough for me to hear my own thoughts, the guilt had already sunk its teeth into me. Every step I took toward the barn felt like wading through mud that grabbed at my ankles and tried to pull me backward. But curiosity is a stubborn companion, and tonight it dragged me along by the collar. I told myself I just wanted to check that the structure was still standing, that the roof hadn't blown off entirely, or that the bikers hadn't torn the place apart while they waited out the storm. The sheriff had driven off hours ago, leaving me with his parting warning to stay inside. But I'd spent decades on this land. If something happened in my barn, I needed to see it with my own eyes. The wind still pushed against me as I crossed the yard, my coat soaked through my boots sinking into cold mud. Lightning flickered in the distance, no longer violent, but steady enough to cast strange reflections across the wet ground. The barn doors were cracked open, a thin line of warm light spilling into the night like a path I wasn't supposed to follow. I hesitated at the threshold. My heart hammered so loudly I wondered if the men inside could hear it. I pushed the door farther open and stepped in. Heat washed over me from several portable heaters arranged carefully along the walls. Rainwater dripped from the bikers' jackets onto the concrete floor as they moved around the barn with quiet focus. No one was laughing. No one was roughhousing. They worked with a calmness that didn't match the roaring storm outside. And then I saw the boxes again, stacked neatly on pallets, each wrapped in thick, waterproof tarps. Labels I hadn't noticed earlier stood out now under the brighter light, temperature sensitive. Fragile. Keep dry. The lettering wasn't handwritten, but printed like something you'd expect from a clean warehouse, not a biker convoy barreling through Wyoming. The smell in the room was wrong too. Sharp, clean, almost sweet, like fresh plastic or new rubber, completely different from gasoline or chemicals. My brain scrambled to connect the dots, reaching for anything that made sense, but the pieces didn't fit any picture I understood. Before I could get closer, a voice spoke behind me. "Sir, you shouldn't be out here." I spun around so fast, the door banged behind me. The biker addressing me was tall, broad-shouldered, with a thick beard dripping water onto his shirt. In the storm light earlier, he had looked intimidating, but up close, his expression was unexpectedly gentle, puzzled even, like he couldn't understand why an old man was wandering around in weather like this. I swallowed, unable to find my voice. He stepped closer and reached out as if to steady me. "You'll get sick walking around soaked like that," he said. "The heater's back there. You should warm up." Heat rose in my face, a mixture of cold and embarrassment and something close to shame. He wasn't threatening me. He wasn't angry. He was worried. Worried about me. The man whose call had brought the sheriff down on them. I wanted to explain myself. I wanted to say something decent, something human. But all my words were jammed behind the stubborn wall of fear I'd built over years of being alone. So I stepped back and shot a glance at the closest tarp. "What's in the boxes?" The question sounded harsher than I intended, suspicion bleeding through every word. The biker followed my gaze but didn't bristle or flinch. He simply inhaled and said quietly, "Not my place to say." The way he said it wasn't evasive, it was disciplined, as if he were following rules. He added, "But I promise you we're protecting it." That didn't help my confusion one bit. Why did something need protecting this badly? Why temperature control? Why 3 trucks? Why 50 bikers? A storm hit the roof again, rattling it so hard, dust fell from the rafters. Several men hurried to check the braces they had installed earlier, tightening ropes and shifting pallets away from drafty corners. Every move they made was efficient, deliberate, like they'd been trained. My heartbeat slowed just a little as I watched. These weren't disorganized men. They weren't drunk or unruly the way I had imagined when I slammed the door and called the sheriff. They were focused, coordinated almost. Careful. I drifted closer to one of the pallets, drawn by a strange impulse like the truth was within arm's reach. The tarp fluttered for a brief second when the wind pushed through the cracks in the door. That was all it took. One flash. One moment. I caught a glimpse of bright colors underneath. Not dark packaging. Not chemical drums. Something colorful and small and neatly arranged. Something that looked nothing like contraband. I blinked, leaned forward, but the tarp fell back before I could make sense of it. The biker beside me frowned slightly. "You okay, sir?" I forced a nod. My mouth was too dry to speak. He sighed and looked toward the storm. "I know we look rough. I know nights like this make a man think the worst." He paused, studying me the way you study a scared horse. "But we're not here to harm anyone. We're just doing our job." His tone had no resentment, no accusation, just a patient sadness, the kind that comes from being judged too many times. That tone dug into me deeper than anything else had that night. I didn't deserve this kind of patience. Not after calling the sheriff, not after watching one of them get shoved into the mud because of my fear. I backed away from the pallet, letting the truth sink in. Nothing here felt dangerous. Nothing felt illegal. Nothing matched the story I had built inside my head. And yet the biggest contradiction of all was how these men treated me. With concern, with restraint, with respect greater than I had shown them. The storm growled overhead again, and one of the heaters flickered. The bikers immediately moved to protect the cargo from the dropping temperature. Their urgency wasn't the urgency of men hiding drugs. It was the urgency of people who genuinely feared something precious might be ruined. My confusion twisted into something heavier, darker, something dangerously close to shame. For the first time that night, a thought surfaced that rattled me more than any thunder. If these men weren't criminals, then what exactly had I done by calling the cops on them? I didn't know the answer yet. But I could feel it coming, and it scared me more than the storm, more than the dark, more than the bikers themselves, because for the first time in a long time, I was beginning to suspect I might not be the victim of the night. I might be the one who caused the harm, and the truth inside those tarped boxes, whatever it was, held the key to whether that harm could ever be undone. The storm finally broke near dawn, not peacefully, but in that sudden Midwestern way where the wind just stops, like someone cut the strings holding the sky together. The world outside my window had turned pale gray, washed in that eerie calm that comes after a night of hell. I stepped outside, the air sharp and cold as a slap to the face. Puddles glistened in the faint light. My barn stood intact, a little battered but holding strong. The bikers were already awake, moving with surprising quietness for a group their size. Some cleaned mud off the tarps, others tightened straps, and a few checked the trucks as if ready to leave at any moment. Their efficiency made me feel even more foolish for everything I had assumed about them. Before I could approach, the distant wail of sirens cut through the morning air. My stomach clenched. I'd almost forgotten the call I'd made in panic last night. Sheriff's cruisers rolled down my gravel lane tires, slicing through puddles, red and blue lights flashing across the damp fields. The bikers stilled. None ran. None hid. They simply straightened like men preparing for a blow they'd learned to expect. I wished I could sink into the mud. Sheriff Whitaker stepped out first, heavy boots splashing water hand on his belt. "Morning, Elias," he said. "You reported suspicious cargo. Suspicious bikers." "You still concerned?" I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. I felt every one of my 62 years pressing down on me. Before I could reply, Roy, the leader, walked forward slowly with both palms open at chest height, calm as a man who'd learned how to speak to people who feared him. "Sheriff, we have no problem cooperating. Just please be careful with the cargo. We can't lose any more of it." Sheriff raised an eyebrow. "Any more?" Roy hesitated, then said, "We took some damage earlier this week on the road. Cold weather isn't kind to what we're moving." Sheriff grunted. "Well, let's see it then." The words hit me like a punch to the ribs. I wanted to shout, "Wait, don't open the boxes." I didn't know why, instinct maybe, or guilt, but something deep in my chest screamed that whatever was inside wasn't meant to be handled by suspicion. But I stayed silent. Sheriff motioned to a deputy who stepped forward, gripped the edge of the nearest tarp, and pulled it back. My breath caught. I expected weapons machinery drugs. Something terrible. Something that would justify everything I'd felt, everything I'd done. Instead, the box revealed soft colors, pastels, plush shapes, bright packages with cartoon animals smiling across the sides. The deputy froze. Sheriff leaned closer. And then the truth hit all of us at once. The box was filled to the top with children's toys. Not cheap toys either. Specialized sensory sets. Hospital-friendly dolls, weighted blankets, learning puzzles. Sterile play kits sealed in medical-grade plastic. Items designed specifically for kids going through treatment. Immune. Compromised kids, cancer wards, long-term care. I blinked, hoping I was hallucinating from lack of sleep. But it was real. Every label, every item. Roy exhaled softly. "Sheriff, we're the Mercy Riders Outreach. We deliver winter-safe toys and care packages to pediatric hospitals every December. We were on our way to St. Jude's and 2 smaller hospitals down south. The storm trapped us. Elias was kind enough to shelter us." The words hit me like a knife. Kind enough, as if I hadn't brought the sheriff down on them. As if I hadn't watched one of their men get shoved face down in mud because of me. Sheriff glanced back at me, his expression unreadable. "Elias, you knew about this." I opened my mouth, but the words just weren't there. The truth pressed hard behind my ribs. I'd been wrong. Dead wrong. Roy lifted a soaked envelope from a shelf. "One of the men found this last night. It was tucked between the crates. The paper was warped and stained from rain. Purple crayon handwriting peeked through the smudges." Sheriff took it and unfolded it. I moved closer without thinking. It wasn't a manifest or a coded message. It was a child's letter. "Dear Santa Riders, please bring toys to the kids in my cancer ward. Some of them won't have another Christmas. They're really brave, but they get scared at night. I think your bikes would make them feel safe. Love, Emily, age 7. My throat closed, the words blurred. Sheriff let out a long breath. "Well, hell." He turned toward Roy. "Why didn't you just tell us this when we arrived?" Roy brushed rain off his sleeves. "Every time we explain, someone accuses us of using charity as a cover. It's easier to keep our heads down and prove ourselves at the hospitals." Sheriff nodded slowly, shame creeping across his face. He cleared his throat. "Well, sorry to disrupt your morning. You folks are free to go." One of the deputies muttered something like, "Thought they were hauling meth." Roy didn't react. He didn't gloat. Didn't even look smug. He simply said, "Kids are waiting. We need to move on." Sheriff turned to me again. "Elias, next time maybe ask before assuming." My ears burned hot. I nodded stiffly, though the gesture felt useless in the face of what I'd done. The cruisers rolled out, leaving behind churned mud and a silence so heavy it nearly buckled my knees. Roy glanced at me, his face unreadable. I braced for anger, for resentment, for disappointment. He simply offered a tired half-smile. "You didn't know. Most people don't." Then he turned back to his men and motioned for them to start loading the trucks. But the moment he looked away, my shame grew into something almost unbearable. Because the truth was, I had known. Not the details, not the mission, not the name of the organization. But I had known in my gut the moment they lifted those heaters. The moment the young biker offered me gloves. The moment they repaired my barn roof in the middle of a storm they didn't owe me anything for. I had known they weren't criminals. I just didn't want to believe it. It was easier to let fear talk than compassion. Easier to trust the worst in people after years of loneliness carved deep into my bones. And now a child's Christmas depended on men whose goodwill I had stained. I didn't yet understand how far the damage went. I didn't know the tragedy awaiting them on the road. But I could feel something inside me shifting, already a crack forming where light might enter. For the first time since Mary died, I wondered if maybe the world wasn't as lost as I had convinced myself it was. But before I could make sense of any of it, one thing became clear. My mistake wasn't done with me yet, and neither was the storm. After the sheriff left and the last cruiser turned down the road, the farm settled into a quiet that felt heavier than the storm itself. The bikers resumed their work with a tired determination, packing crates, checking straps, whispering instructions to each other like men who'd carried too much disappointment in their lives to waste time complaining. I stood next to the open box filled with toys, staring at the pastel colors like they were accusing me. Every stuffed bear, every puzzle kit, every carefully packed comfort item reminded me of how quickly I had judged them, how eagerly I assumed the worst. Shame sat on my chest like a weight. I wanted to say something to Roy to any of them, but I didn't know where to start. So instead, I helped gather fallen tarps, my old hands shaking with the cold and with guilt. That's when I noticed the edge of a purple envelope peeking out from beneath a broken pallet near the barn wall. It must have fallen during the storm or been dropped in the chaos when the sheriff arrived. I bent down and picked it up. The paper was wrinkled, waterlogged, soft around the edges like wet leaves. My name wasn't on it, but something in me knew it wasn't mine to keep. Still, I felt a pull, like whatever was inside was meant for me. Like the universe was trying to put something in my hands I'd spent too many years avoiding. I opened it carefully, peeling apart the damp flap. Inside was a letter written in bright purple crayon, the handwriting big and uneven, each word shaped with the raw sincerity only a child can manage. "Dear Santa's Riders, thank you for helping us last year. Some of my friends are still here in the hospital. They get scared at night because the machines beep and the rooms are cold. They miss home. I miss home too. Could you bring more toys this year? Not for me, but for them. I can share mine. They are brave. Braver than me. They need happy things so they don't feel like they are dying. Love. Emily, age 7. My vision blurred instantly. I tried to blink it away, telling myself it was just the cold wind stinging my eyes, but the truth hit me like a fist. This wasn't just a letter. It was a plea. A tiny girl somewhere in a sterile hospital room fighting who knows what, writing to these men the way my generation wrote to Santa Claus, believing magic still existed somewhere in the world. And I had almost ruined her Christmas, maybe worse. If the sheriff had confiscated their crates, if the toys had been held as evidence, if the riders had been delayed too long, these kids who might not have another year to wait would have lost something they desperately needed. Hope. Comfort. A reminder that someone still saw them. My stomach twisted so hard I had to steady myself on a crate. For years, I'd lived with small regrets, turning away charity volunteers, snapping at a lost driver, refusing to help an elderly neighbor because I was too tired. Little things I told myself didn't matter. But this was different. This was the kind of mistake a man doesn't walk away from unchanged. Roy approached quietly, his boots crunching through the gravel. He stopped beside me not too close, just near enough to look at the letter in my hand. "Emily's," he said softly. "She always writes in purple crayon. Said it makes wishes brighter." I swallowed hard. I didn't know what to say. Didn't know how to admit that I'd nearly sabotaged something sacred. Roy gently took the letter and ran his thumb over the smeared drawings at the bottom: a heart, a motorcycle, a smiling stick figure with hair-like scribbles. I looked at him expecting anger or bitterness or exhaustion aimed my way. Instead, I saw something worse: sadness. A deep, tired sadness etched into a man who'd spent too many nights seeing things most people don't want to see. "She's fighting leukemia," he said. "Been in the ward almost a year now. Her mom works nights. Her dad left a long time ago. She writes us these letters because it makes her feel less alone." I felt something inside me fold like a chair collapsing under too much weight. "I'm sorry," I whispered, but the words felt flimsy and useless in the cold air. Roy finally looked at me. "You made a mistake, Elias. Fear makes fools out of all of us sometimes." He paused, then added quietly, "But the kids don't have time for mistakes. Not big ones." His words didn't come with blame. They came with truth, and that truth sank in deep. A gust of cold wind blew across the field, carrying with it a faint smell of wet hay and diesel. I watched the bikers preparing to leave, moving more urgently than before. They were behind schedule now. Hours behind. Time that sick children didn't have. A sick feeling washed over me. What have I done? Roy didn't answer. Maybe he didn't need to, but I could feel the weight of it. My fear had consequences. My suspicion had slowed them down, and though no one said it aloud, we all felt the same unspoken dread. Delays on icy highways during storm season weren't just inconvenient, they were deadly. I stared down at the letter again, the purple crayon now fading as it dried. Little Emily's hope scribbled in shaky loops across paper that had survived rain, wind, and my ignorance. Her words echoed in my mind. "They need happy things so they don't feel like they are dying." I closed my eyes and saw Mary's face, frail and pale in her hospice bed. The way she gripped my hand and whispered, "Elias, don't shut the world out when I'm gone. Promise me." I never promised her, and maybe that was why my heart felt like it was splitting open now. I folded the letter gently and handed it back to Roy. He tucked it safely into his vest, then rested a hand on my shoulder. Not a reprimand, not a judgment. More like a passing of grief or forgiveness, or maybe a warning. "We'll get back on the road soon. I just hope the storm didn't block the pass." A chill ran through me deeper than the cold could explain. I had a terrible feeling the worst wasn't over yet. But I also knew this: I couldn't undo what I had done. I couldn't erase last night's panic or the damage it caused, but maybe, just maybe, I could find a way to make it right. The letter hadn't just broken me, it had cracked open something I thought was long dead. And through that crack, for the first time in years, light began to pour in. The storm finally broke just after noon, leaving the sky a bleak gray, the kind that feels heavy enough to fall on your shoulders. The bikers were packing up to leave, moving slower than they had earlier, each man showing the wear of a night spent battling wind and cold and suspicion from a stranger like me. I stood in the doorway of the barn holding a thermos of coffee I'd made for them, unsure if I had any right to offer even that. Roy accepted it with a nod, though his eyes looked somewhere far beyond my fields, as if he were already riding the long miles ahead. The engines started one by one, their rumble softer now, like tired animals rising after a hard winter. I watched them pull out of my driveway, 50 riders in staggered formation, each jacket soaked, each face drawn tight with purpose. I clutched the railing of my porch guilt twisting inside me like a cold knife. I should have helped them sooner. I should have trusted them. I should have done anything other than what I had done. Hours passed. The storm clouds drifted north, but the cold remained sharp enough to cut. I tried to distract myself by clearing debris from the yard, picking up fallen branches, fixing a broken hinge on the barn door. But every time I stopped moving, that purple letter flashed in my mind. Emily's shaky handwriting, her plea for joy, her belief that those riders carried magic. I kept checking the radio, hoping for nothing but static, hoping the universe might give them a smooth ride after everything I'd put in their path. But just after 5 p.m., the radio crackled alive. A reporter's voice came through, strained and breathless. "We've just received breaking news out of Granite Pass. 2 trucks belonging to a volunteer relief convoy overturned due to ice and high winds. Reports say the vehicles were carrying children's donations bound for regional hospitals." The world seemed to tilt. I froze, one hand still gripping the barn door hinge I'd been repairing. Granite Pass was exactly the route Roy's group had to take. A second voice came on, somber and slow. Dozens of crates destroyed. Emergency services struggling to reach the site. Conditions remain dangerous. My heart pounded so hard I felt dizzy. The thermos slipped from my hand and hit the ground with a hollow thud, spilling coffee across the dirt. No, God, no. I stumbled into the house and grabbed the phone with shaking fingers, dialing every number Roy had written on the slip he left. No answer. Straight to voicemail. I tried again and again. Nothing. The image of those men flashed in my mind, exhausted faces, bruised knuckles, jackets torn from the storm. They had already been running low on strength when they left my farm. Had my hesitation slowed them down enough to put them in that storm's teeth? Was this my fault? I paced the kitchen like a trapped animal, the floorboards creaking beneath my boots. The radio gave another update, this one confirming what I already feared. 2 riders injured, several trapped, crates containing medical toys, warm blankets, and comfort kits destroyed. The reporter paused, then added the words that crushed me completely. Many of these supplies were intended for pediatric oncology wards. I grabbed the edge of the sink and leaned forward as if the weight of the news might throw me to the floor. The world blurred. My breath came out harsh and uneven. I could see Emily's letter in my mind, the words glowing like a wound. "Some of my friends are still here in the hospital. They need happy things so they don't feel like they are dying." And now, half of those happy things were lying in shattered pieces along a frozen mountain road. I could almost hear her tiny voice asking why. Why help hadn't come in time. Why the world kept disappointing her. Why a group of men who spent their lives bringing hope to sick kids were now bleeding on the side of a cliff. And the sickening truth was this: they might have made it through the pass before conditions worsened if I hadn't delayed them with fear and suspicion. I went outside, needing air I could barely draw in. Snowflakes drifted like ashes. The horizon glowed with winter's pale, dying light. I imagined Roy's bike lying in the road wheels, twisted toys scattered across ice like the debris of broken dreams. I imagined the children waiting in hospital rooms, unaware their gifts had been destroyed by a storm and a frightened old man's mistake. Tears stung my eyes, hot and unwelcome. For years, I had built walls around myself, blaming grief, blaming age, blaming the world for changing faster than I could keep up. But the truth hit me harder than the storm ever could. I had become a man who let fear make his decisions. A man who assumed the worst. A man who hurt others to protect himself from shadows. A man my wife wouldn't have recognized. I sank onto the porch steps, snow melting on my palms. The wind was ice against my face, but I barely felt it. Every breath tasted like regret. The radio crackled again, softer this time. "Emergency crews confirm all riders are alive. Injuries vary. Remaining convoy still attempting to push through." Relief echoed through me, but it was tangled with something darker, because even if they survived, they had lost so much. Supplies ruined, mission delayed, time stolen. And I knew in my bones that some part of that loss belonged to me. I wasn't sure how long I sat there. Long enough for the snow to settle on my jacket, long enough for the cold to numb my hands. But inside my chest, something I thought was long dead finally woke up. A resolve, a responsibility, a need to make this right. The tragedy wasn't just theirs, it was mine. And I wasn't going to let the story end here, not for them, and not for the children waiting in hospital rooms with fading hope. Something had broken today. But something else had broken open. And for the first time in years, I knew exactly what I had to do. I don't remember standing up. One minute I was frozen on the porch steps, snow settling on my shoulders, the radio's grim reports echoing in my head. The next, I was moving with a purpose I hadn't felt in years. Something inside me had snapped, but maybe snapped was the wrong word. Something had unlocked. Something that had been rusted shut ever since Mary died. I walked into the barn, the boards creaking under my boots, and looked around as if seeing it for the first time. It wasn't just a structure anymore. It was the last place those riders had known safety before disaster swallowed them. Their footprints still marked the dirt floor. The tarp they used to cover the crates still hung crooked on a nail. The stray glove one of them had lost lay on the workbench, stiff from the cold. I picked it up and turned it over in my hand. The leather was worn creased by years of someone else's work and weather. I held it to my chest for a moment and whispered into the emptiness, "I'm sorry." But apologies didn't move mountains. They didn't rebuild hope. They didn't fix what had been broken on Granite Pass. Action did. So I did the only thing a stubborn old man with a lifetime of regrets and a barn full of guilt could do. I made a plan. I grabbed the keys to my old Ford pickup, the one Mary used to call the mule, because it never gave up even when it groaned, and then I went into the shed. The lights flickered on, illuminating Tool's spare parts, and sitting beneath a tarp like a sleeping giant, the last valuable thing I owned, my father's 1961 tractor. Green paint steel wheels engine rebuilt after 3 winters of scraped knuckles and long nights. It was the only inheritance I'd ever received. The last physical memory of the man who taught me what it meant to work hard and keep your word. Selling it felt like cutting off a piece of myself. But kids in hospital rooms didn't need my memories. They needed toys, blankets, comfort, hope. And I had something worth trading for all of that. I pulled off the tarp, ran my hand over the cold metal, and whispered, "Dad, I hope you understand." The town was small, but news traveled fast. When I called the collector who had offered to buy the tractor years ago, he answered on the first ring and showed up within an hour with a trailer and a check already filled out. $12,000. More money than I'd seen in a long while. As he drove away with the tractor, I felt my chest tighten, not with regret, strangely, but with relief. That weight I'd been carrying for years seemed to roll off into the snow. I climbed into my truck, the check tucked in my coat pocket like a lifeline, and headed toward town. The roads were slick patches of ice glittering under the fading light, but I didn't slow down. Every minute mattered. Every second was a chance to undo what I'd done. My first stop was a toy store 50 miles away, one that stayed open late during Christmas. I walked in with my arms full of determination and a wallet full of sacrifice. The cashier, a young girl with braces and a ponytail, looked at me funny when I pushed 3 carts toward the register. Dolls, puzzles, stuffed animals, art kits, model cars. Anything that might make a sick child smile. "Big family," she joked, scanning item after item. "Something like that," I said. "A family that needs a little help." She paused long enough to swallow hard before saying, "I can give you the employee discount. It isn't much, but every bit counts, right?" I nodded, unable to speak for a moment. That small kindness cracked something open in me again. The kind of crack where light gets in. I drove to 5 more stores, then 3 more in the next town, then a thrift shop where the owner slipped extra blankets into my cart with a wink and a whispered, "No charge." By midnight, the bed of my truck was piled so high I had to strap a tarp over everything to keep the wind from stealing it on the highway. People stared curious or confused, or just plain surprised, but no one questioned me. And the oddest thing was how many helped, how many hands reached out with stuffed toys, mittens, coloring books, things they didn't need anymore, things they wanted to pass on. At one gas station, the attendant, a man who looked half my age but twice as tired, lifted a box of toy cars into the truck bed and said I had one of these when I was 7. "Hope it makes some kid feel lucky tonight." I thanked him, voice tight in my throat. The whole world seemed to be leaning in, whispering, "Do more. Don't stop." So I didn't. I kept loading until the springs of the truck sagged under the weight, until my back screamed, until my fingers went numb, until there was nothing left in the stores to buy. And somewhere between the last store and the quiet stretch of highway leading home, I realized something that made my breath catch in my chest. I wasn't doing this just to fix my mistake. I wasn't doing it because I felt guilty, though I did. I was doing it because I finally remembered who I used to be. A man who believed in helping strangers. A man who knew that kindness wasn't a weakness. A man Mary would have recognized. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the eastern horizon was turning pale blue. I didn't stop long. I transferred everything from the truck to the barn, organizing toys by size and type, stacking blankets, securing art kits in bins. I worked fast, fueled by a strange blend of exhaustion and purpose. When I finally stepped back, the barn looked nothing like the empty shell it had been the night before. It looked full, not just of toys, but of possibility, of redemption, of a second chance. I wiped my hands on my jeans, breathing hard, and whispered into the cold morning air, "This time I'm going to get it right." And as the sun began to rise over the Wyoming plains, painting everything in soft gold, I knew in my bones that the road ahead wasn't just about fixing what I'd broken. It was about becoming the man I'd forgotten I could be. I left the barn just as the first hint of sunlight scraped across the horizon, thin and cold like a blade sharpening the winter sky. My truck groaned under the weight of everything I'd packed into it, but it held steady as if it somehow understood the urgency of where we were headed. I climbed in, turned the key, and the engine sputtered twice before settling into a low growl. "Come on, old friend," I muttered. "We've got kids waiting." I pulled onto the empty road, the tires crunching over frost, and pointed the truck toward the interstate that would take me straight to Riverview Children's Hospital. 200 miles. Fresh snow drifted across the asphalt in ghost-like sheets. The radio signal crackled in and out, static weaving between stray country stations, until suddenly a familiar voice cut through the noise. It was Roy. His tone was steady but worn, like a man holding himself up by sheer will. "We lost 2 trucks last night," he was saying. "Most of the toys were ruined. We're still making the run, but we're short. If anyone out there hears this, we're headed to Riverview. Anything helps. Anything at all." I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. Hearing him, knowing what he'd already endured, knowing what those children were expecting, it fueled something fierce inside me. I pressed harder on the gas. Snow whirled across the windshield like white fire. The wipers struggled, squealing with every sweep. Trucks passed me in the opposite lane, their headlights scattering across the falling snow. A storm wasn't coming, it was already here, a smaller echo of the one that had broken everything open. My back ached, my shoulders throbbed, my eyes burned from a night without sleep, but none of it mattered. The road ahead felt less like a highway and more like a promise. Every mile was a chance to set right what I'd undone. Every breath carried the memory of Emily's purple crayon, the thought of a child writing to Santa's riders because she believed they could make her friend's Christmas morning bright. I had to make sure she wasn't wrong. 50 miles in the wind picked up slashing sideways across the truck. The steering wheel jerked in my hands. I fought it back. Visibility narrowed to a tight tunnel of gray. I leaned forward, squinting into the blur. "Just keep moving," I told myself. "You're not quitting now." A semi passed me, throwing a wave of slush across my windshield, so thick it turned everything white. For a split second, I couldn't see anything. My heart seized in my chest. I slapped the wipers on high. The blade screeched, pushing away the sludge just enough for me to see the road again. I sucked in a shaky breath. "Mary," I whispered, "if you're listening, I could use a little help right now." The storm thinned as I neared the state line. Light broke through in small, trembling rays. The landscape transformed from snow-smothered plains into rolling hills dusted with frost. When I finally reached the sign that read, "Riverview 26 Miles Relief," hit my chest like a warm hand pressing over my heart. I wasn't there yet, but I was close. Close enough that my eyes stung with a mix of exhaustion and something softer, something like hope. The radio broke through the static again, this time soft country music, a song Mary used to hum while shelling beans on summer nights. It made my breath catch, but instead of hurting, it steadied me. My hands loosened on the wheel, my foot eased up on the gas. It felt like she was nudging me forward. When the hospital finally came into view, a pale building rising against the winter sky, its entrance lined with weak Christmas lights, I nearly laughed out loud. I pulled into the lot tires fishtailing before catching traction. A row of motorcycles stood huddled near the loading dock, their chrome dulled from salt and wind. Riders slumped beside them, exhaustion etched deep into their faces, helmets in their laps. They looked beaten, defeated, but still standing like soldiers after a long battle. I parked the truck and stepped out. The cold slapped me in the face. One of the riders glanced up, brow furrowing as he saw the tarp-covered mountain in my truck bed. "Sir," he said, pushing himself up. Before I could answer, another voice cut in. "No way." Roy limped out of the loading bay, his jacket torn at the sleeve, a bandage over his eyebrow. His eyes widened. "Elias Turner," he said, sounding almost breathless. "You made it." "Had to," I said. "Figured you could use a little backup." He walked to the back of the truck, lifted the corner of the tarp, and stared at the pile beneath it. Toys. Blankets. Books. Enough to refill not one, but maybe 2 lost trucks. He swallowed hard. "You did all this? I had help," I said. "Whole town pitched in. And I brought something else." I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out the letter. Emily's letter. The purple crayon still smudged at the edges. I placed it in his hand. "You dropped this at my barn. It led me here." Roy read it, his face tightening with emotion. When he looked at me again, his eyes glistened. "Let's get to work." And so we did. Side by side, rider and old farmer. The others joined in, gathering boxes, lifting crates, stacking toys on rolling carts. Nurses hurried out, shocked by the sight, covering their mouths with trembling hands. "Where did all this come from?" one asked. Roy looked at me. I looked at him. "From a mistake," I said quietly, "and a chance to fix it." More riders appeared, shaking off their exhaustion as hope filled the spaces where despair had been. The last box rolled inside just as snow began falling again, slow and gentle this time, as if the storm had softened too. I followed the riders into the brightly lit hallway. The warmth hit me like a wave after the long, cold drive. The air smelled of cinnamon and disinfectant. Children peeked from behind nurses' legs, eyes widening as they saw the carts overflowing with gifts. One little boy gasped. A toddler squealed. A nurse wiped tears from her eyes. And in that hallway surrounded by strangers, riders, nurses, and children who had no idea how close they'd come to disappointment, I realized something so simple it almost buckled my knees. This wasn't about redemption anymore. This was about purpose, about becoming the man Mary always believed I could be. Roy clapped my shoulder. "You ready to meet the kids?" he asked. I took a long breath. "Yeah," I said softly. "Let's go bring a little light." And for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I needed to be. The moment I stepped into the pediatric wing, the air shifted. It wasn't the warmth or the soft glow of Christmas lights strung around door frames. It was something quieter, something deeper, like a sigh held between these walls, a mixture of bravery, exhaustion, and hope so fragile it felt like glass underfoot. I walked behind the rolling carts stacked with toys, the wheels squeaking on linoleum that smelled faintly of cinnamon and antiseptic. Nurses guided us from room to room, their smiles soft but their eyes tired. And every time a child caught sight of what we were bringing, something inside me twisted, broke rearranged. The first room held a boy with a pirate bandana tied loosely on his bald head. He couldn't have been older than 8. He perked up when we entered, eyes bright but ringed with dark circles, swinging his legs as if trying to summon energy that wasn't there. Roy picked up a model ship from the cart and held it out. "Morning, Captain," he said with a grin. "Heard you could use a new vessel." The boy reached for it with trembling hands, his lips parting in awe. For me?" Roy nodded. The child clutched the ship to his chest like it was treasure, then looked at me. "Are you Santa's helpers?" he asked. "I'm trying to be," I said quietly. His mother covered her mouth, shoulders shaking silently, tears running down her cheeks. I swallowed hard and followed the group to the next room. A girl about 11 sat propped on pillows, a soft pink blanket around her shoulders. A row of crayons was spread out beside her, though she seemed too tired to use them. But when I handed her a brand new watercolor set, something lit up behind her eyes, a tiny spark, but real. "Purple's my favorite," she whispered. "Best color," I replied. "Shows up even when the light is low." She smiled small but determined and picked up the purple brush first. Emotional undulation rolled through me. Tenderness, sadness, gratitude, regret all mixed together until I didn't know what to do except keep breathing. We moved to another room. A teenager thin as a winter branch sat staring at a blank sketchbook on his lap. His headphones were cracked taped at the edges. I held out a new set, sleek cushioned deep navy blue. "These holds sound real nice," I said. He blinked, then took them slowly like he wasn't sure they were meant for him. When he settled them over his ears, something eased in his posture. His shoulders dropped, the tightness around his mouth softened. He gave me a small nod. Respectful, quiet, grateful. My throat tightened. How many moments like this had I missed in life? How much time had I wasted guarding myself from people I should have helped? The questions stung, but they pushed me forward. Then we reached a room, dimly lit, blinds half closed. Soft beeping filled the air. Machines hummed with steady precision. A little boy lay curled on his side, his breath shallow but even. The nurse whispered, "This is Marcus. Tough week for him." I stepped closer, careful not to startle him. I picked up a music box from the cart, a tiny wooden one with a glass dome containing a miniature train circling a snowy village. When I turned the crank, a gentle melody poured out, delicate and pure. The small train chugged around its track in slow, perfect loops. Marcus's eyes fluttered open. He stared at the tiny world in my hands, transfixed. Then, barely there, a smile traced the corners of his mouth. Soft, trembling, but unmistakably a smile. My breath caught. His nurse put a hand over her heart. "He hasn't smiled in days," she whispered. That one smile felt like sunlight cracking open a frozen field. It warmed something deep in me that had been cold for years. We continued down the hallway, my legs growing heavier, not from fatigue, but from the weight of emotions piling up inside my chest. A ride of joy, heartbreak, hope, and sorrow, each child a rise and drop in the tide. And then we reached the door with a drawing taped to it. Purple stars, a big round Santa, a motorcycle with wobbly wheels and hearts around it. The handwriting was uneven, the letters wide and childlike. Emily, the girl who wrote the letter I found, the letter that had cracked me open. The nurse opened the door gently. Emily sat upright in bed, wrapped in a soft fleece blanket, a knit cap covering wisps of hair. Her eyes were bright, wiser than 7, but still full of wonder. She looked at me and smiled like she'd been waiting. "Hi," she said softly. "Are you one of Santa's riders?" I took my hat off, suddenly aware of how small I felt in the presence of this tiny warrior. "I'm trying to be," I said again, but this time the words meant something entirely different. She reached for the rabbit plush I offered, white fluffy with a little ribbon around its neck. "He looks like a hush," she said, "like a quiet friend." "That's a perfect name," I whispered. I pulled her letter from my coat pocket. "You dropped this at my barn," I said. "It found me before I found you." Her eyes widened. "It didn't get lost." "No," I said. "Some things don't get lost easy. They wait for the right hands." Her mother, sitting in the corner, pressed her palms to her face, shoulders shuddering with silent sobs. Emily hugged Hush close. "I didn't ask for anything for me," she said. "I just wanted the kids here to have a good Christmas." Those words hit me harder than any storm ever could. I felt something break inside a shell, a wall, a lifetime of fear and bitterness melting into something warm and fragile and painfully human. I knelt beside her bed. "You made more good than you know," I said. "You changed everything." She reached out a small hand. I took it gently, holding a warmth that felt like purpose. When I stood and stepped back into the hallway, Roy was waiting. "You good?" he asked. My voice cracked. "No," I said, "but I think I'm finally becoming better." We finished the wing in quiet reverence, each gift placed. Each child met each parent, hugged or comforted, or simply accompanied in silence. And when we were done, when the last toy was handed out and the last tiny smile earned, I realized something that struck through me with the force of truth. These kids weren't just receiving hope. They were giving it, piece by piece, smile by smile, breath by breath. They were stitching something back together in me I didn't even know was torn. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a man walking alone in the quiet. I felt like someone worth walking with. When we finally stepped out of the pediatric wing, my legs felt unsteady, as if the floor itself had shifted under me and I hadn't found my balance yet. Maybe it wasn't the floor. Maybe it was me. Something inside had changed quietly but permanently, like a door I didn't know had been locked suddenly opening. Roy handed me a paper cup of coffee as we stood near the end of the hallway. Steam curled upward soft and warm against the stale hospital air. "You held it together better than most," he said gently. I shook my head. No, I didn't. Those kids. They broke me in a way that feels right. Roy gave a small smile. Breaking isn't always bad, Elias. Sometimes it's the start of something. I looked through the glass wall of the pediatric wing one more time. Nurses walked briskly. Parents whispered. Children smiled at new treasures they'd hold on to for the next hour, the next day, maybe the rest of their lives. I felt that letter, Emily's letter, pressed inside my coat like a heartbeat. We walked down the corridor toward the lobby, footsteps echoing against tile. Volunteers passed carrying boxes of extra blankets, coloring books, and medical-safe toys. Their simple movements, their tired smiles stirred something warm in my chest. Purpose, maybe, or the memory of purpose. Something I hadn't felt in years. When we reached the lobby, Roy stopped and turned to me. His expression was softer than I'd ever seen. "You know," he said, "I've been riding for 30 years. Seen every kind of man on the road. But I've never seen someone turn around like you did." "Wasn't courage," I muttered. "Just guilt." "No," he said. "Guilt doesn't drive a man through a snowstorm carrying half of Wyoming in his truck. Something else does." He hesitated. "You've got it, Elias, whatever it is." Before I could answer, one of the riders, a young woman named Jody with tattoos spiraling up her arms, rushed over. "Roy," she said breathlessly, "they want our inventory numbers. They're asking how much we lost in the crash." Roy rubbed his forehead. "More than we can replace in a week, but—" She lowered her voice with what he brought. She glanced at me. "It changes the math." Roy clapped a hand on my shoulder. "Changes everything." I didn't know what to say. I felt like a man who'd done the right thing too late, trying to outrun the mistake he'd made. "Don't thank me," I said. "I'm the reason you got delayed in the first place. I called the sheriff on you." Roy shook his head. "Storm delayed us. Fate delayed us." You corrected the course." Jody nodded. "People don't fix their mistakes like that. Most just walk away." My throat tightened. "I almost did. But you didn't." Roy said simply, "That's what matters." We stepped outside into the icy morning air. The sun had barely cleared the horizon, a pale gold smudge behind a curtain of winter clouds. The riders gathered near their motorcycles, checking straps, tightening ropes, exchanging quiet words. Some of them glanced at me with nods not pitying or polite, but respectful, the kind of nod a man gives another man who earned it. I wasn't used to that. It made my chest ache. Roy pulled something from his jacket. An envelope. He held it out. "This is from the Foundation's reserve," he said. "A thank you for saving our run." I stepped back. "I don't want money. It's not charity," he said. "It's partnership." Still no. He sighed, slipped the envelope away. "Okay, but that means you owe me something else instead." I raised an eyebrow. "What?" He motioned to the riders. "We need a permanent storage and sorting hub for next year. A place to prep, sort donations, repair what needs repairing, store what needs storing. Somewhere central, somewhere sturdy, somewhere safe." I stared at him confused. "Why tell me?" "Because you have one," he said. "Your barn." The breath left my lungs. My barn. It's perfect. Big enough for trucks. Strong roof. Open space inside. And more important, he paused, looking straight into my eyes. It belongs to someone who understands what this work means. My hands began to shake slightly. Roy, I'm a retired rancher, a broken-down widower with barely 2 pennies to rub together. Why would you want my barn? He smiled. Because it isn't about the barn, Elias. It's about you. The words hit me in a place I didn't know was still sensitive. For years since Mary passed, I'd felt like a shadow of the man I once was. A body walking around an empty house. A voice talking to a woman who wasn't there. A pair of hands that no longer knew how to help. I'm not who I used to be, I murmured. Roy shook his head. No one is. But today, I watched you become someone better than who you were yesterday. I blinked back, a heat rising in my eyes. The wind whipped around us, carrying the faint smell of snow diesel and something warm I couldn't quite name, maybe hope, maybe purpose. A young rider approached holding a clipboard. We need signatures if we're formalizing hubs for next season, he said. Is he in? He looked at me, brows lifted. A strange silence fell over the group, the kind that happens right before something changes. Roy waited. The riders waited. The wind itself felt like it waited. I looked at the hospital behind me. The windows of the pediatric wing glowed softly. I thought of Marcus's shy smile, the teenage boy with the headphones, the watercolor girl, the pirate captain, and Emily, the child who didn't ask for anything except joy for others. My eyes stung. I breathed in deeply, the cold air burning my chest. Yes, I said finally. I'm in. Roy broke into a slow, wide grin. The riders cheered, clapping my back, shaking my hand. For the first time in years, the noise didn't scare me. It warmed me. For the first time in years, I felt like part of something bigger than my loneliness. Welcome to the family, Roy said. Family. I hadn't heard that word in so long it almost hurt. I looked up at the gray sky. Somewhere above those clouds, Mary was probably shaking her head, smiling that soft smile she wore whenever I stumbled into the right thing without meaning to. I whispered under my breath, hoping she heard me. I'm trying Mary, and for the first time since she left this world, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I was becoming someone she would still be proud of. When I drove back home that evening, the sun was low over the snowfields, spreading a pale gold across the Wyoming plains, and for the first time in years, the light didn't feel harsh or lonely. It felt like something was opening, as if the world had cracked a window just wide enough for warmth to slip in. I parked the truck beside the barn and sat for a moment, hands still on the steering wheel, breathing in the silence. It was a different silence than before. Not empty, not accusing. Something like a pause in a long song, a moment that holds meaning because of everything that came before. I stepped into the barn, switched on the hanging bulb, and watched shadows stretch across the floorboards. Just last night, this place had been filled with fear, suspicion, and mistakes, my mistakes most of all. And yet today, the same space held something else entirely. Possibility, purpose. I walked to the workbench and found the small purple ribbon that a volunteer had tied on one of the boxes earlier. I didn't even realize I had kept it in my pocket. Now it lay curled in my palm like a message. I ran my thumb over its satin surface. This tiny scrap had meant joy to a child I'd never met. Funny how something so small could change the way a man breathes. I pinned it to the wooden beam above the bench next to the old nail where Mary used to hang her sun hat after chores. For a moment, I stood there with my eyes closed, close enough to imagine her humming under her breath, the way she used to when she wanted me to calm down, slow down, just be present. I whispered, I'm trying to be better. The barn smelled of dust and cold wood, but now it also held the faint trace of peppermint from the toys we'd unloaded and cinnamon from the rolls someone had shoved into my hands before I left the hospital. I breathed it in. Purpose has a scent. I hadn't known that before. I walked outside and leaned on the fence, watching the early stars appear. The riders were probably halfway across the state by now, engines humming along empty highways, carrying hope into dark corners. For decades, I thought I had nothing left to give. After Mary died, everything in my life felt like subtraction, less joy, less laughter, less reason to wake up before the sun. I became a man who shut doors instead of opening them, a man who mistrusted kindness because he believed he no longer deserved it. And then, in one storm, with one fear-driven phone call, I nearly stole Christmas from children fighting battles far heavier than my loneliness. That shame will stay with me, but maybe it should. Not to punish me, but to remind me of what fear can make a man do and what courage can help him undo. What I learned is this redemption doesn't come wrapped neatly with a bow. It doesn't arrive when you're ready for it or when you think you've earned it. It shows up in the shape of a child's crayon letter or a convoy of bikers who look rough on the outside but carry more kindness than most churches I've ever sat in. It shows up when you hand over your father's tractor, the last piece of your past you swore you'd never let go, so that a child with no hair and too many tubes in her arm can smile for 1 minute longer. Redemption shows up when you stop asking the world what it owes you and start asking what you can give back. I didn't expect the writers to accept me, but they did. Not as a charity case, not as some old man desperate to matter. They accepted me because I proved even late in life that a man can change direction. The world tells us that people don't change after 50, that scars harden, that bitterness calcifies, that loneliness becomes identity. But I'm living proof that change isn't a young man's game. It's a willing man's game. The first step is admitting you were wrong. The second is doing something about it. As I stood there watching the moon rise, I realized the barn wasn't just going to be a storage place. It was going to be a heartbeat mine theirs, and maybe hundreds of others from towns I'd never see. A hub for hope. A place where hands would sort toys, repair bicycles, pack blankets, tape boxes, and whisper small prayers over gifts that would travel hundreds of miles to children who needed magic more than medicine. It would be loud in December, messy in July, and full of strangers who felt like family. I imagined next winter's run, the riders pulling into my driveway again, engines roaring, boots, muddy smiles wide. I imagined opening the barn doors and seeing it alive with color light and purpose. I imagined children in faraway hospital rooms holding something that started in my old barn. And I wondered how I ever lived without this feeling. The truth is simple. You don't lose kindness. You just stop using it. It waits patient as a barn in winter until the moment you decide to open the door again. I think Mary tried to teach me that. I wish I had listened sooner, but I'm listening now, and that's enough. Before heading inside, I whispered the words I wish someone had told me years ago. Words I hope the wind carried as far as the riders on the highway. What we keep is what we give. And for the first time since my wife passed, I felt at peace. Not because the storm was over, but because I finally knew what to do when the next one comes. There are nights in a person's life they never forget, and then there are the nights that change the way they see the world. If you've stayed with me through this story, through the storm, through the fear, through the regret, and the redemption, then maybe something in it spoke to a place inside you that remembers what it feels like to lose faith in people and then find it again in the most unexpected hands. I used to think the world was getting colder, that kindness was a language folks didn't bother speaking anymore, that trust was something only a fool would offer. But those writers proved me wrong. Those kids in the hospital proved me wrong. And maybe, in a way, you being here now proves me wrong too. Because if you're still listening, it means you believe in something deeper than headlines and noise. It means you know that a man can make mistakes, even big ones, and still choose a better road the next morning. Maybe you've lived long enough to understand that life has a way of swinging us between sorrow and grace, between fear and courage, until we realize the only thing that lasts is what we do for other people. And maybe, just maybe, you've known the kind of loneliness that makes a quiet house feel heavier than it should, the kind that settles in your chest like winter frost. I know that feeling well. It can make you suspicious, guarded, small. It can make you close doors on people who were only ever trying to help. But then, one moment comes along, a letter in purple crayon, a child's smile, a stranger's hand on your shoulder, and suddenly the world cracks open a little, letting in a light you thought you'd lost. If this story reminded you of anything you've lived through, if it pulled up a memory of someone you helped or someone who helped you, if it made you feel that old ache of wanting to do better or be better, then maybe that's the reason you found it today. And if you want more stories that remind you that goodness still exists, that redemption is real, that folks can surprise you in the best ways, even after you've stopped expecting it, then you're in the right place. Because that's what we do here. We tell the kind of stories that stay with you after the video ends. Stories that help you breathe a little deeper. Stories that return something the world keeps taking from us: hope without bitterness, truth without cruelty, kindness without conditions. So if you'd like to be part of this little corner of the internet where decency still matters and simple hearts still win, I'd be honored to have you join this family. Go ahead and subscribe, not for me, but for the next story that might remind you who you used to be. Turn on the notifications so you don't miss the moments that could shift something inside you the way this one did for me. And if someone in your life needs to remember that good people still walk this earth, share this story with them. You never know whose storm it might calm. Life can be hard. The seasons turn fast. But as long as we keep choosing compassion, as long as we keep reaching out instead of turning away, as long as we keep seeing each other not as threats, but as fellow travelers on a rougher road than we expected, then maybe, just maybe, we'll make this world a little kinder than the one we inherited. Thanks for being here. Really, it matters more than you know.